industry has done everything in its power to avoid scrutiny when it comes to loot boxes, which is a highly profitable, highly lucrative venture involving what is essentially gambling being added into video games where they don't belong, games rated as E for everyone or teens. Even mature games, I don't feel, should have loot boxes because loot boxes are gambling, and in most states in the US, gambling is a 21 years old and above activity, as it should be, because it is very much psychologically dangerous. It can be addictive. Game companies know this, and they exploit that to just milk those susceptible to this kind of stuff, to those who are psychologically vulnerable to gambling-like elements. And the ESRB, they are not doing much about it. They're the ones who are supposed to be protecting consumers by informing them of a game's content with the ratings that they provide with video games with certain labels and warnings, but instead of providing very clear and concise label about loot boxes and the gambling-like elements that they represent, they've instead tried to skirt the issue by introducing the in-game purchases label that doesn't really tell you much about anything. Well, after much scrutiny and backlash and government intervention, the ESRB has finally introduced something. Here is a blog post on the official ESRB website. The headline reads, "Introducing a new interactive element. In-game purchases includes random items." Now, for one thing, that random items, it's such a vague label, and there is no warning here, there's no indication that these random items are any danger whatsoever. And you can see right here in this image that the ESRB is dismissing the notion that loot boxes and in-game purchases are a mature activity. They put a teen label here to minimize the fact that loot boxes and these random items that come with in-game purchases are pretty much like gambling, an adult activity. So with that, let's check out what they had to say about all of this. In April 2018, the ESRB began assigning interactive elements to physical video games with the in-game purchases and user interact notices. The in-game purchases interactive element informs parents and other consumers of when a game offers the ability to purchase additional items without leaving the game. To provide even greater transparency, there would have to be transparency in the first place, but the in-game purchases label doesn't provide any semblance of transparency whatsoever. It's such a vague and wide-reaching label that parents can't make informed decisions based on just that label alone. So this continues to provide even greater transparency about the nature of in-game items available for purchase. The ESRB will now begin assigning a new interactive element. In-game purchases includes random items. What does this notice mean? This new interactive element, in-game purchases includes random items, will be assigned to any game that contains in-game offers to purchase digital goods or premiums with real-world currency or with virtual coins or other forms of in-game currency that can be purchased with real money currency, for which the player doesn't know prior to purchase the specific digital goods or premiums they'll be receiving, e.g. loot boxes, item packs, mystery awards. I love how they don't just stick to loot boxes, item packs, mystery awards, surprise mechanics, whatever they are, whatever visual form they take, at the fundamental core, they are still all loot boxes. But of course, they won't just call that loot boxes. The term widely used to label these types of mechanics because they know that loot boxes have gained a sort of nefarious reputation. They've garnered notoriety over the past few years as a result of the egregious, and I know I like to use that word a lot, but there's no better word for it, egregious monetization systems that these companies have implemented that have gained a lot of traction in the media. The blog post continues. In-game purchases includes random items will be assigned to all games that include purchases with any randomized elements, including loot boxes, gacha games, item or card packs, prize wheels, treasure chests, and more. Games that have the in-game purchases includes random items. Notice may also include other non-randomized paid elements. And here's in big letters, consumers can make more informed decisions when purchasing or downloading a game instead of finding out after the fact. That is assuming that a game company doesn't pull off a scheme that many titles have done before, where they launch a game without the microtransactions and loot boxes starting out, but then they're introduced in an update down the line. Activision in particular comes to mind. What happens then? People might buy that game believing that this game will not have such elements, such monetization systems, only for them to be added down the line, and then them having to potentially engage with that to continue enjoying the game, because in-game purchases and monetization systems and loot box monetization are often designed so that if you don't engage, if you don't pay, then you just get a lesser experience, a more frustrating, a less fun, a more grindy experience. And so that's how they get you hooked to this stuff. The blog post continues. The original in-game purchases notice will still be assigned to games that offer any other type of purchase, including additional levels, cosmetic items, DLC expansions, etc. However, going forward, it will not be assigned to games with loot boxes or similar mechanics to ensure consumers clearly understand when the game offers purchases with randomized elements. But what this vague label, this includes random items label, doesn't clearly inform is that these elements are dangerous. Just saying a game has randomized items won't inform parents or people who are casual gamers who maybe don't keep up with the news. It won't tell them anything about the potential dangers of these mechanics. And throughout this whole blog post, you'll see that there is no emphasis on how loot boxes are very much like gambling and how that does pose potential psychological ramifications to certain age groups and adults as well if they are psychologically wired a certain way. The blog post then proceeds with why now? According to research, parents are far more concerned about their child's ability to spend real money in games than the fact that those in-game purchases may be randomized. Yeah, that's because they don't understand that loot boxes are very much like gambling, because you keep labeling them differently. If you ask the parent, are you concerned about gambling being in games that are meant for kids, then they'd give you a much different reaction. They would probably tell you that, yeah, that's incredibly disconcerting, but how can they be concerned about an issue that is not being clarified and that they don't know much about, that is trying to be hidden with labels like randomized items, surprise mechanics, and whatnot, rather than being labeled with what loot boxes actually are, gambling. This data helped to inform the introduction of the in-game purchases interactive element. That being said, since adding the in-game purchases notice to ratings assigned to physical games, many game consumers and enthusiasts, not necessarily parents, again, most parents don't understand that loot boxes are pretty much gambling, so of course they won't talk about something that they are not aware of, have reached out to us asking the ESRB to include additional information to identify games that include randomized purchases. The in-game purchases includes random items interactive element was developed in response to those requests. The only thing that was developed here is a term that's specific enough for people who already keep up with the news and know about loot boxes already to understand what this is, but it is vague enough so that parents and more casual gamers, parents who are kind of not aware of what's going on and might buy FIFA for their kids, not knowing that it's actually just a casino game disguised as a soccer game. It's vague enough for those people so that when they look at this includes random items label, they don't sense any danger and they probably won't know what that entails or means. The blog post then adds, by including more specificity about the randomized nature of the in-game purchases, consumers can make more informed decisions when purchasing or downloading a game instead of finding out after the fact. This, once again, is assuming that game companies don't go out of their way to add loot boxes after a game has launched. And then here's in big words, we want to ensure that the new label covers all transactions with randomized elements. This is their excuse for why they are using the term random items instead of loot boxes. On that front, here's what they had to say. Why not say loot boxes? Loot box is a term that doesn't encompass all types of randomized in-game purchase mechanics. We want to ensure that the new label covers all transactions with randomized elements. In-game purchases includes random items, accounts for loot boxes, and all similar mechanics that offer random items in exchange for real-world currency or in-game currency that can be purchased with real money. Moreover, we want to avoid confusing consumers who may not be familiar with what a loot box is. Recent research shows that less than a third of parents have both heard of a loot box and know what it is. Loot box is a widely understood phrase in and around the video game industry and among dedicated gamers, but most people less familiar with games do not understand it. If somebody doesn't know what a term is, then just tell them what that means. Let them know that loot boxes are essentially gambling-like elements. Let's be clear about this. Any system that allows you to pay real currency for the random chance of earning a potentially desired reward is gambling. That is the definition of gambling. And even if laws haven't caught up to deem loot boxes as gambling, it is what it is. So instead of saying includes random items, why not just say includes gambling-like elements? There's no confusion surrounding that. I hate this excuse of, well, calling something what it is would just confuse consumers because it's a new and emerging term. Therefore, we shouldn't reinforce it and just tell people about what loot boxes are, which they could do, but they won't. Because game companies don't want the term loot boxes to spread as this negative term because they want to sell loot boxes, and the ESRB no doubt is lobbied by the games industry, by many of the companies. And given that it is a branch of the ESA, and given that the ESA has proven time and again that they're not willing to responsibly keep game companies in check because the ESA is being lobbied and run by a lot of these companies and executives from these game companies. This whole system is just rigged. You know, any organization that actually cared about the safety of customers and about transparency wouldn't talk about, oh, consumers are too stupid. It's just too confusing for them if we use the term loot boxes. That's just an excuse to be as vague as possible to try to not educate people about the potential dangers of loot boxes, to not warn them, and to not paint loot boxes under a negative light, because that might affect sales, that might affect profit margins. That's what this is all about. And as for the excuse of, well, there are loot boxes and similar mechanics that may not fall under the purview of loot boxes, then just say loot boxes and loot box-like mechanics. Put that label out there, or even more specificity would be gambling or gambling-like elements. That would actually alarm parents, that would actually bring attention to this issue in a way that was more transparent and in a way that would really highlight the true nature of loot boxes, which they don't want. They want loot boxes to be deemed as these fun surprise elements. What this is, ladies and gentlemen, is a misdirection. That's all this is. This is them pretending to be proactive when in reality, putting this label out there won't really make that much of a difference. It's so hypocritical of them to say that they want to avoid confusing consumers, but the random items label is so vague that it might as well be confusing. To close things off, the blog post reads, while this new label is primarily in response to feedback from game enthusiasts, it is still essential that all consumers, especially parents, have a clear understanding of the rating information we provide. Labeling something with gambling-like elements as teen or E for everyone, and then including a random items vague label, like, what does that do? And then to close things off, of course, we'll continue to educate parents on all forms of in-game purchases, parental controls, and ESRB assigned age and content ratings. The average parent, I can tell you, does not visit any of these websites. They keep trying to make the excuse that, well, we already have parental controls all detailed here in this link. We have a website for that, ergo that allows us to do anything because parents have all the control. But no casual gamer parent visits the parental control site, and even when they do, the process of enabling these parental controls can be extensive, can be a pain in the ass. And last but not least, look into the future. As always, we'll continue to monitor how video games evolve and innovate to ensure that we provide parents and other consumers with the information they need to make informed decisions about which games and apps are appropriate for their family. Additionally, ESRB will continue to update parental tools.org so parents have access to parental control guides for all major video game devices. This is something I've said before, but when a game like FIFA, which is E for everyone and it's a soccer game, requires parents to be wary about enabling parental controls, this is a game that is kids-friendly according to the ESRB. There's something very wrong with that picture. The solutions to this whole issue are very simple. You know, age gate, games with loot boxes with adult-only labels, add the appropriate warnings in-game and on the box, not vague terms like includes random items, but actually state what these mechanics are. You know, educate parents about the term loot boxes instead of saying you guys are too dumb and it's all too confusing for you to understand, because that's the excuse anyone uses to hide something, not to be transparent. There are so many things that the ESRB and the ESA and the game companies as a whole could proactively be doing to mitigate this. But no, they're just skirting around the issue rather than tackling it head on, and that's why the government is stepping in. Even casinos are more regulated than video games right now. So yeah, that's my stance on this issue, folks. This is nowhere close to being enough, in my opinion. This is just them misdirecting people, seeming proactive. So that's my take. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on this situation, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out. So Borderlands 3 came out back in September 13th, 2019, and it was generally received positively. It did have some technical issues at launch. The story and characters aren't quite as good as Borderlands 2, but people generally find it a fun game to play, and it sold extremely well. In fact, in a statement from Take-Two, they noted how Borderlands 3 establishes the franchise as a billion-dollar global brand, and apparently it did the best in the series, performed better than Borderlands 2, and they touted all kinds of records in this statement. So a lot of developers of Borderlands 3 expected big bonuses based off of this due to how Gearbox, the developer of Borderlands, operates with its profit-sharing type of payment system, which I'll get to in a bit. But apparently CEO Randy Pitchford, who's been known for pretty shady behavior in the past, has recently told his developers that they're not getting the bonuses they expected. The following information was reported by Jason Schreier, who spoke to a number of sources who corroborated this information. The headline reads, "Sources, despite huge sales, Borderlands 3 developers are getting stiffed on bonuses." The opening paragraph begins by talking about the success of Borderlands 3 and how well it sold, and how developers expected to get big bonuses, which is, quote, "While it was shocking to employees at Gearbox, the developer of the game, and the studio CEO Randy Pitchford told them yesterday that they would not receive the significant royalty bonuses they expected. Employees at the studio will get small bonus checks, but nothing close to the tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands that many had expected." And this is based on conversations with 6 people close to Gearbox. And then Kotaku's article added, "Some said it was crushing news that has upended their financial plans for the future." It goes without saying that when somebody's promised a bonus, a certain level of financial infusion, then there will be plans